Shabbat Shalom. So I know I was talking an awful lot in the Torah and Haftarah introductions about the reconciliation of the family. And that is a huge portion of Vayigash, when we finally see Joseph reveal himself and the family indeed becomes reconciled. But the first part of Vayigash, the actual Vayigashing, if you will, is of Judah stepping forward not to talk to his brother, because Judah doesn't know that Joseph is his brother. That's the whole concept of the conflict here. Instead, who does Judah think that he is talking to? Not quite the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh's right-hand man, the one step down from Pharaoh. It's not quite Pharaoh. It's Pharaoh Jr. And literally he says, you are like Pharaoh. You are close enough to being Pharaoh that you might as well be Pharaoh. And yet, Judah still has the chutzpah to talk to him. And not only talk to him, but complain. This is dramatic. And in fact, from Judah's approach to the Pharaoh Jr., the vice Pharaoh, if you will, the VP, vice Pharaoh, it's... Sorry, it only works in English, unfortunately. We learn a great deal about what it means to complain, about what it means to protest. Because this is essentially what is happening here. This is the first example in the Jewish line of speaking truth to power. We get a lot of that throughout our prophetic tradition, and it's very easy to see people like Isaiah and Amos and Hosea and Jeremiah and all the others that went and stood in front of the throne of the kings of Judah and Israel and complained vociferously, to think that they were the ones who were starting it and were doing it purely because they were infused by God's Spirit in such a powerful way. Well, Judah didn't have that advantage. He wasn't a prophet of Isaiah or Jeremiah's caliber. He was just a guy. And he was a guy that saw something that he thought was wrong. So help me deconstruct exactly what his argument was. Because oftentimes this gets misunderstood, especially if you have imbibed too much of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat version of the story. Judah makes a very particular form of an argument. And if we can take it apart, if we can understand the elements that he chooses to include, then we can begin to see how to be an effective person who complains, a proper protester, if you will. So what is Judah's basic presentation? What is his elevator speech to this VP? We read it in Hebrew and you all had a copy of it in your hands in English. Give me just an element of it. What are some, his bullet points on the PowerPoint presentation he puts up behind him as he talks to the VP? What are some of the bullet points that he is including in that presentation?
If we don't bring Benjamin back, it's going to kill our father.
Okay, so our dad will die, right? Benjamin is so important to our father that if we don't bring him back, Jacob will die. That's a fairly heavily emotionally laden request. But there's more to it than just that. He doesn't just say, our dad will die if we don't bring Benjamin back. Why would Jacob die if they don't bring Benjamin back? What does Judah actually say to this VP?
Because their other brother died, and it almost killed their father.
Exactly. And this new one, Benjamin, is now the most precious one.
Is now the most precious.
Think for a second about what Judah is saying here. First of all, he is absolutely saying out loud that he is not his father's favorite, nor any of the other brothers. It's Benjamin now. Benjamin is the father's favorite. And indeed, that was why Benjamin didn't come down in the first trip. Was because Benjamin was their father's favorite, and he wouldn't risk Benjamin's life going down to Egypt. He'd risk everyone else's life, but not Benjamin. And in fact, Jacob was even willing, as we saw during last week's Torah portion, to almost starve the family to death rather than risk Benjamin's life. And now why is Benjamin's life so much more precious? Well, it's not just because he is the son of Rachel, but because he is the only remaining son of Rachel. And Judah admits this to Pharaoh. And indeed, in last week's Torah portion, amongst themselves, not knowing that Joseph could speak Hebrew, they talked to themselves about how much they regretted having gotten rid of Joseph. That they realized that this problem was built not just because of the famine and the food situation, but also because there wasn't a spare child of Rachel. That instead, they realized that somehow this was all coming back to haunt them. And they were contrite over what they had done to Joseph. So Judah is proposing that his father will die because this is his favorite son, because the other son was gone. Pretty powerful stuff. But is that enough to sway a VP? I mean, what's at stake here? What are they accused of having done? Of stealing. But not just stealing. Stealing what is a personal artifact of the VP, and stealing what may even be presumed to be thought of as a religious artifact of the VP. It's his divination cup. This is like Grand Theft Auto. It's not just they took a couple extra coins when they were heading out of the town. They didn't just steal from the marketplace and forgot to pay for the papaya. This is like the top level of theft. And is this a persuasive argument? Because after all, you'll notice that nowhere does Judah say Benjamin is innocent. That's not his point. He's not saying it didn't happen. He's not saying Benjamin didn't take it. He has no way of knowing whether or not Benjamin took it or not. My Wednesday Lunch and Learn class, now up on YouTube, we talk about this in more detail, about the evidentiary issues and whether or not this was just or unjust under the circumstances of pharaonic courts. But Judah does not take the "he's innocent, let him go" approach. Judah accepts that a crime was committed. So what is his proposal? Punish me. Punish me? Not exactly punish me. I'll be a slave instead of him being a slave. It's not that I should be punished, but just make a swap. He is making a deal. He's saying, look, Pharaoh, if you take this young man and you put him in prison, then you are going to kill an old man in another country who doesn't deserve to die because he's already suffered enough. But for you, really, the punishment of him isn't the issue, is it? Right? It's not like, oh, the mighty justice of Egypt has to be avenged in the blood of punishing Benjamin. You see somebody committing a crime, and what are you going to get out of it? You're going to get a slave out of it. Fine. I'm not going to argue that the crime didn't happen. I'm not going to argue that he's innocent, because what standing do I possibly have to make that argument here in your court? Instead, I'll say, okay, you are right. You are owed one slave because of this crime. Take me as a slave because that won't kill my father. He's offering a swap, not because Benjamin is innocent, but simply to save his father's life. And it should make no difference to this VP which slave he ends up with. Benjamin's leaving. Benjamin's gone. He's back to Canaan and never going to be bothering here anyway. But he adds another element, which I think is beautifully Jewish and chutzpahdik. He partly blames the VP, because he lays out the story of why Benjamin was in town in the first place before he begins his this is how we could work this out element. He's like, no, why is Benjamin here? Benjamin is here to presumably steal because you made us bring him. We didn't want to bring him. Our father didn't want him to come. When we first showed up without him, you're like, oh, do you happen to have a father and any other brothers? Well, and when we said yes, you all of a sudden were like, oh, good, bring your brother next time. How? I mean, this never would have happened if you had not been so unreasonable, if you had not been so crazy fixated on this mystery brother hundreds of miles away that you, for some reason, wanted to see. Remember, he doesn't know this is Joseph. He just thinks this is some power-mad and quite oddly shaped VP that is demanding that a random brother come from another country before they can get more food next time, which they were paying for, mind you. And Judah lays that at his feet, basically saying, look, it's not really only our fault that we're in this situation, whatever happened with the goblet. It's not really only our fault, it's your fault too, because none of this would have happened if you had just behaved like a reasonable person and let us come down, buy food, and leave, and be done with it. I mean, honestly, if it had just happened as a regular marketplace, none of this would have occurred. So it has occurred, but anyway, how about if you don't kill our dad by taking this guy, and I'll be the exchange instead, value for value. It seems fair to me, after all, we're only in this mess because of you. And we warned you in the first place that if something happened to this brother, if we had to bring him, that it would kill our father. So you are also responsible. It is a masterclass in how to complain. It is a masterclass in how to protest. Because you see, a lot of us get caught up in thinking that we're protesting when we're not. If you only speak up when it's about you, you're not protesting, you're just complaining. If somebody is saying, oh, we're going to knock down this tree in order to build a widening for the road, and you're like, oh no, the environment, because it's the tree that you like near your house, but you can care less about the trees being knocked down somewhere else, then you don't care about trees. You care about this tree because it's your tree. It's your favorite tree. That's not protesting. That's complaining. You have to be willing to complain about something that isn't just about benefiting you. And Judah does that. Judah is protesting not for himself. He is putting himself in jeopardy of becoming a slave. He's not getting any benefit out of this other than not having to face his father if he has to go back without Benjamin. He is stepping up for his brother, not for himself. Which he didn't do for Joseph, absolutely. Which none of the other brothers did for Joseph. Judah has changed. He has recognized that he has to stand up for what is right, even if it is going to hurt him. This is something, unfortunately, that he had to learn the hard way through the story of him and Tamar, which is a whole nother chapter to discuss another time. If you only speak up against your enemies when they do something you think is wrong, but you don't speak up when it is your friends or family doing something that you think is wrong, then you are also not protesting your enemy's behavior. You're merely attacking your enemy. You have to actually recognize that if you are protesting for a reason, not as a form of attack. And here we see Judah doing that. This VP is not actually his enemy. And he is stepping up because he just believes this to be wrong. It should not incur the death penalty for his father because Benjamin stole something. That is wrong. And he is willing to say that to Pharaoh. Not his enemy, not his friend, just the person who happens to be in charge at the moment. If you only speak up because other people are already speaking up, and you're afraid that if you don't speak up, they're going to criticize you, then you're also not protesting. You're just bandwagoning and covering your rear. You don't actually care about the situation or the issue. You just care that you don't want to be seen to not be caring for others that will then turn and attack you for your silence. Now, while it's good that people can be persuaded by others of what they need to recognize as being an issue, if when you then choose to join in working towards a resolution for that issue, only because you don't want to be the odd one out, then you're not actually protesting and you should not be patting yourself on the back. If you only speak up when someone else is louder, if you only speak up when someone else is taking the risk, if you only speak up when someone else is on the front line, and you are there as the background singers, closest to the exit should something go wrong, then you're not actually protesting either. You're merely joining in the cacophony. You're merely adding noise to what's going on. If you only protest and protest and protest, this is wrong, this is bad, this is terrible, you're evil, and you never actually propose a solution, then you're also not protesting, you're just whining. You're whinging. To protest means to offer an alternative. And again, for all of these, we see Judah does this. He presents an alternative. It's not perfect. It's not this horrible miscarriage of justice needs to be overturned, because he's not 100% sure that Benjamin didn't take it. I mean, after all, as the Midrash points out, Benjamin's mom was also a thief. Go back and check it. She stole from her dad. So, maybe Benjamin is a thief. But despite that, he still believes there is a more fair solution to what's going on. And he is willing to propose that solution, to put himself in the way, and to be the first one to stand up. Not just stand in the back going, yeah, but to say, no, this is wrong. Here's what we should do about it. And I am willing to be the one to both speak up and work towards that solution. Throughout our history, this is the model that gets replayed over and over again. And usually we lose. It's important I put that caveat at the end rather than the beginning, because otherwise you wouldn't have listened to me. Usually, those who speak truth to power find out that power has power and is more than capable of stomping them down. But sometimes it works. Sometimes you reconcile an entire family. Sometimes you reconcile a nation. Sometimes your protest may not work to the person that you are speaking to at the moment, but it works to the others who hear of what was being said. Or it works for the next generation to move forward in that idea. When you look at the great revolutions that have swept across the world, they are inspired by some of the ideas that are found throughout the Torah and the prophetic works. Ideas that fell on deaf ears to the kings and queen of Israel and Judah. That certainly did not persuade the Romans or the Babylonians or the Persians about justice and peace and what was right for the world. But eventually those ideas have changed the nature of power. They have swelled the ranks of people that are willing to legitimately protest, to put themselves forward with risk, to speak up against injustice, and to have affected real change. It begins with one guy talking to a really, really weird person in Pharaoh's service, but recognizing that it must be said, it must be done, and no one else is going to do it, so it better be me. It continues through all of our generations. And the world that we live in today, which we must recognize as being a blessed miracle compared to the generations of past, is the result of their courage and protest. And if you want the world to be better, you need to follow their example. Shabbat Shalom and Happy New Year.